Hello, everyone. So let's talk about the toxins and the chemicals a little bit more. So, environment contains countless natural substances that may pose health risks, and that includes petroleum, radon gas, um, and toxins. And toxins are chemicals that are manufactured in tissues as living organisms, and they're often used as defense against others. For example, toxins can be chemicals that plants use to ward off herbivores or that insects use to defend themselves from predators. And in addition, we are exposed to a bunch of other chemicals. Synthetic chemicals are all around us. We talked about pesticides, herbicides, insecticides before. Um, and in addition, there are other chemicals that are being manufactured, so pesticides, cosmetic ingredients, um, you know, human pharmaceuticals, food additives. So that's the estimated number for the chemical and commercial substances. So, pesticide exposure and exposure to all the other um, chemicals, it starts in the womb, pretty much. So what I want to say that synthetic chemicals, the exposure starts in the womb, and as the substances our mothers ingest while pregnant, those are transferred to us. There was a study done in 2009, and they found 232 chemicals in the umbilical cords of the newborn babies when tested, and 9 out of 10 cords contained BPA. So we are pre-polluted, we are polluted in the womb, and then it just continues. Um, so like I said, chemicals, they are all around us, and many of them find their way into the human, um, inside the humans and the environment. And so this picture is kind of showing you that. So consumer products, so, we buy groceries. Some of the products they have BPA. If you buy plastic water bottles, we are consuming those. Workplace, if you're using laptops, those have some things that can be affecting your thyroid gland and thyroid hormones. Pesticides and fertilizers, we already know that those some of them remain in the food, can be ingested. And water, lead, we talked about lead in the water. So those chemicals can seep into water and drinking water. Air is polluted, from all that factory smokes, secondhand smoking, so air for breathing. And soil, again, those chemicals that we use as fertilizers can go into the soil, and also from the waste, animal waste can go into the soil, and then they can impact us and also non-human biota. All right. So what are different types of chemicals? So there's carcinogens that are substances that uh, so type of radiation that can cause cancer. And cancer occurs when malignant cells grow uncontrollably. So any cell that just starts to grow and grow and grow, that's cancer. Mutagens are substances that cause genetic mutations of the DNA of the organisms. And most mutations, they have little to no effect, but some are negative and they can cause problems like cancer. Tetragens are specifically that cause birth defects. So those are the three types. And Um, even though some of them are not that harmful because most of the time mutagens they have no effect and they can be beneficial, but then they can also be harmful. So sometimes they are harmful that can, especially if they happen in the sperm cell or the egg cell, then the person can have a lot of negative impacts. Tetragens, they can cause harm to the unborn. They affect development of human embryos in the womb, and they can cause birth defects. Um, so when someone's pregnant, if they talk to the doctor whenever they want to take a medication, they always recommend for a pregnant person to talk to the doctor because they don't want to be taking something that can impact the baby. So there was a case in 1950s where there was a drug, thalidomide. It was used as a sleeping aid to prevent nausea during pregnancy, but it caused severe birth defects in thousands of babies whose mothers got this medication. So it got banned, the drug got banned, but um, it did have a lot of birth defects. Neurotoxins are the ones that are like heavy metals. They damage the nervous system. Um, and allergens are overactive immune system causing immune response when it's not necessary. And one hypothesis for recent increase in asthma is the prevalence of allergic synthetic chemicals. Pathway inhibitors block one or more steps in biochemical pathways. And so these are different types of substances that can cause harm. One example for pathway inhibitor is cyanide. It kills by interrupting a chemical pathway that produces energy. So rat poison, for example, cause internal hemorrhaging in rodents by interfering with biochemical pathway that create blood clotting proteins. So even though synthetic toxicants are new, organisms have been exposed to these for a long time. For example, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and other harmful substances. Um, some organisms produce biological toxins to avoid predators or capture prey. For example, some snakes, they have venom. Some spiders have that. And over time, they're able to tolerate the harmful substances that have gained evolutionary advantage. Um, so what are some natural defenses against toxic substances? So skin, scales, and feathers, they resist uptake from the surrounding environment. Sometimes these can enter your body through eating, drinking, and breathing. And once it's um, inside, then metabolic pathways can break down toxic substances or make them water soluble, so they can be excreted to kidneys. But if they cannot do that, if they cannot be metabolized, then they are sequestered by the body in fatty tissues and they stay there forever. Um, then you cannot really take them out if once they're in the fatty tissues. And then it also kind of depends on if you're exposed to these for a long time or chronic exposure, or if you're only exposed to for a little bit of time and that's acute exposure for short periods. If it's acute exposure, it's easy to recognize, but maybe it was an oil spill or chemical spill or an accident ingestion. But if it's a chronic exposure, it's happening very slowly over time. For example, smoking can cause lung cancer, and when alcohol abuse leads to liver damage, then that's chronic, and it's going to take a little bit of time to see the effects of those. So, due to the movement through current, synthetic chemicals can be found in pristine areas, meaning areas where there were no chemicals before. And the reason is because so many substances are carried by the wind. So here at low latitudes, evaporation of pollutants exceeds deposition, and then pollutants are transported by atmosphere and ocean currents and the wind, And high latitudes, the Persian influence exceeds evaporation, so they're being dropped off. And then they enter the polar wood web and accumulate in biota. So even though we make the chemicals, use the chemicals in temperate and tropical regions, these contaminants, they are concentrated in the tissues of Arctic polar bear and Antarctica penguins and people living in Greenland. For example, PCBs, those are a class of toxic chemicals that are found in electrical equipment, paint, and plastics. And it was banned in like a long time ago, but it's still found in the tissues of wildlife in the Arctic. So Earth's polar regions are particularly contaminated because natural patterns of global atmosphere circulation tends to move airborne chemicals near the poles. So near the equator. Sorry, the poles.